Tell NBA fans why this trip with Miami joining the Heat is going to be a little different after you've played for 4 different teams in the last 4 seasons.
It's going to be different because this is where I'm going to be for hopefully the rest of my career.
Jimmy Butler just left no doubt that he will never play for the Miami Heat again.
The latest chapter is missing the flight and another suspension for Jimmy Butler.
It's become Pat Riley versus Jimmy Butler.
Is that Jimmy trolling?
So we'll let people keep talking like they know everything, like they have all the answers. And then sooner or later, the whole truth will come out.
This is about money.
You're 35. You're making $100 million over the next 2 years to play a game. And you're trying to tell us that you don't have joy.
Breaking news out of the Miami Heat. Jimmy Butler is on his way to the Golden State Warriors.
Over the last half-decade, one team that's become the ultimate nightmare for their opponents is the Miami Heat. Led by Jimmy Butler, the Heat have proved year after year that doubting them is a death sentence. When Butler signed with Miami in the summer of 2019, NBA analysts of all kinds slammed the decision and called it idiotic. But it turned out to be the best move of his career.
I definitely love the Miami Heat though, man.
Jimmy Butler, buckets. The Butler did it.
It'll be the last jersey that I wear. I told Coach Pat, I told Coach Paul, I'm here to win one. Moving forward, I got to hold up my end of the bargain.
He helped transform Miami into a consistent contender that made the NBA Finals twice. Despite gaining a strong reputation as a playoff pest, though, the Heat never broke through into NBA glory. They always found themselves one step behind the champions of the league. And now, the Jimmy Butler era has come to a sudden, dramatic end. So what happened? How did the Heat fall short of winning a championship despite being in the mix every year? And who is to blame for their ultimate failure? In order to answer these questions, we have to go back to when this era started in 2019, because things were so much different. For starters, back in the summer of 19, Jimmy Butler's reputation and track record were far less impressive than they were now. In his then 8-year-long career, he had never made it past the second round. He had been on 3 teams in the past 2 years. And the best team record-wise he had actually managed to defeat in the postseason were the 42-win 6-seeded Nets in 2019. Ask any casual fan, and common sentiments you'd hear being brought up about Jimmy was that he wasn't fit to be a number 1 option on a contender, that he was a locker room cancer, and that he had the playoff success of Tony Romo. As for the Miami Heat, they were in quite the rut as well since LeBron James made his exit. Between 2014 and 2019, the Heat would have considered being called average a flattering compliment. In the 5 seasons post-LeBron, they lost in both rounds 1 and 2 one time each, and missed the playoffs 3 times. The franchise that was once the golden standard for excellency had become painfully middle of the pack. Their roster consisted of nothing but bad contracts, unmotivated players, and no real star power. They had a proven coach in Eric Spoelstra and a winning executive in Pat Riley, yet the problem was that they lacked the talent to maximize it. In a way, entering the summer of 2019, both Jimmy and the Heat were a match made in heaven. They needed each other.
Miami is finalizing a sign and trade with Philadelphia to acquire Jimmy Butler.
Jimmy Butler. The team officially introduced Jimmy Butler today.
That's Wade County in Miami, and he's not going to be Dwayne Wade.
A few hours into free agency, and it became official. Jimmy was a Heatle, signed on a 4-year max deal. His decision was attributed to the dollar signs and to Dwayne Wade convincing him that Heat culture was a perfect fit for his personality. It was a move that sent shockwaves through the NBA. The Miami Heat, who had long been irrelevant and forgotten about, were officially back in the Eastern Conference playoff race. The roster Butler was joining was young but promising. Thanks to the Hassan Whiteside trade, young center and former 2017 lottery pick Bam Adebayo now had a chance at taking the reins as a starter. Newly drafted Tyler Hero with the 13th pick generated some buzz as well after an impressive summer league showing. It was the players that nobody knew about who ended up making the biggest difference though. Two undrafted players, Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson, became extremely important pieces to the Heat's success in the 2019-20 season. Nunn stunned fans by setting a Heat franchise record for the fastest rookie to reach 500 career points, and shockingly earned second place in the Rookie of the Year race. Duncan Robinson, who had signed with Miami on a two-way contract, somehow evolved into one of the NBA's deadliest shooters because the Heat scouts are just Jesus Christ reincarnated. Nobody could have predicted the elite production these two would bring to the table, which is why so many doubted the Heat in the first place. The 2019-20 season represented a groundbreaking level of success the Heat organization hadn't sniffed in years. In a season that was cut short due to the virus, they went 44-29 and earned the 5th seed. Butler soon proved that he was a killer and exactly the type of piece Miami had needed all along. He averaged 26-6 for the team, which was enough to earn him his 5th All-Star appearance. An incredible game early on in the Jimmy era that highlighted the true resilience this Heat team had came against the Atlanta Hawks in December 2019, where after falling behind 6 with a minute left, opposing guard Trae Young shouted, "It's over," to the fans in Miami. These comments would come back to haunt him, as the Heat quickly embarked on a 6-0 run, tying the game with 2 miraculous threes.
Butler for the tie. Yes! The Butler did it!
Then in overtime, they destroyed Atlanta, outscoring them 18-4, securing the win. After the game, Butler, who finished with 20 points, a career-high 18 rebounds, and 10 assists, posted on Instagram with the caption, "This man Trae Young is a teller of the future." He was right. Game was over. It's worth noting that Butler didn't do this alone. Kendrick Nunn poured in 36 points. Duncan Robinson had 34 with 10 threes, and Bam had a 30-point triple-double. This game truly represented the magic the Miami Heat had when everyone was clicking, and they were quickly becoming one of the most exciting teams to watch in the league. Bam Adebayo went from a relatively unknown backup to a third-year All-Star. Tyler Hero was one of the most electrifying rookies the league had to offer, regularly hitting insane clutch shots that no other youngster had the guts to shoot. The Heat's depth and veteran leadership was elite. The team was insanely well-rounded, with the one question mark being if Jimmy could lead this mighty squad through the playoffs. There was immense skepticism surrounding his ability to perform when his team needed him most. On top of this, the Heat were talented, but a lot of their players were young and hadn't dealt with true postseason intensity. How would they handle it? Fast forward to the bubble, because the virus suspended the season. The Heat entered the postseason holding on to the 5th seed. They appeared to face an uphill battle. However, they had one big factor on their side that no one realized at the time. The bubble was the perfect environment for them. When reflecting on the chaos that was the Orlando NBA bubble, players often speak about how depressing and miserable the whole situation was, saying how big of a mental toll it took on them. The Heat, they didn't care whatsoever. Jimmy Butler said he approached the whole ordeal as a business trip, which he meant quite literally. The guy opened an overpriced coffee shop during his stay. The 2020 playoffs quickly became less about who was the best team, and more about who was tough enough to survive the conditions around them. The Heat, having the culture and being as well coached as they are, were built for this. First up in round 1, the Indiana Pacers.
That is a no-no, my friend. Oh, don't read lips. Heat Nation, do not read lips.
During the regular season, these two teams had quite the beef from a heated altercation that took place between Butler and Pacers wing TJ Warren back in January. Butler had blown kisses after the two got into a trash-talking fight. After the game, he said that TJ wasn't even in his league.
He's soft. He's not even in my fucking league, like nowhere near me. And if I was their coach, I would never put him on me ever again.
Now, these two met once again in an unusual setting. In the bubble, Warren had been dominating, averaging 31 a game on 58% field goal shooting. The Heat shut him down. Miami swept the Pacers, showcasing their dominance early in the postseason. Now, any concerns about if the Heat's game could translate into the bubble were quashed. Heat fans had full confidence in their squad, so much so they got Heat in 6 trending on Twitter before their second round series against the Milwaukee Bucks even tipped off. All bubble long, something was just off with the 56-win Bucks. They had dropped Game 1 against the Magic in Round 1 in stunning fashion, and had gone 3-5 in the 8 games before the playoffs. The Heat could smell blood in the air, so they took full advantage, winning the series in 5 games, a gentleman's sweep. Giannis Antetokounmpo, who was coming off his second straight MVP selection, was put in basketball hell this series, averaging just 21 points per game. Many projected the 2020 playoffs as the one where he and the Bucks would finally break through and win a championship. But the Heat spoiled the party thanks to their defense, timely clutch shots, and coaching. Miami had pulled off their first major accomplishment in the Jimmy Butler era, completing a shocking upset that stands as one of the team's greatest achievements to this day. Next up was the beginning of a matchup we'd become all too familiar with seeing, the Celtics and the Heat. They'd end up meeting in the Eastern Conference Finals 3 times, with their first battle coming here in 2020, which the Heat won in 6. 3 out of the 4 Heat victories came by just 5 points or less. Miami was able to wear down the Celtics with their resilient play. The Heat opened up the series leading 2-0, setting the tone in Game 1 with an OT dub. Bam Adebayo was the hero in this one, stuffing Jason Tatum's dunk attempt in the final seconds, which still remains one of the most iconic defensive plays in NBA history. After Boston bounced back and won Game 3, the Heat kicked them down to the ground with a signature Game 4 win, thanks to a 37-point explosion by their rookie 13th overall pick, Tyler Hero. The white boy was cooking on offense, hitting insane Steph Curry-like shots that put Boston away. This gave Miami the momentum needed to close out the series in 6. The Heat had done it. For the first time in a grueling 6 years, they had finally made it back to the NBA Finals. An outcome that absolutely 0 people expected going into the season. In just year 1, the Heat had conquered the mountain that was the Eastern Conference. But Miami's greatest triumph would soon be derailed by an avalanche. In the finals, they frustratingly lost to the LA Lakers in 6. The Heat's backs were against the wall from Game 1, which saw them suffer a devastating slew of season-ending injuries to Bam and Goran Dragic that put them at a disadvantage. Yet even amidst the misfortune, Jimmy Butler still shined and carried his squad to the best of his ability. Down 2-0, the Heat stunned LA with an 11-point win, thanks to a 40-point triple-double by Jimbo. Then in Game 5, down 3-1, he dropped a 35-point triple-double, fighting tooth and nail to scrape out a 3-point victory. The team was pushed to their absolute limit. They were all but a walking corpse come Game 6, which the Lakers took full advantage of, blowing them out to win their 17th championship. While many were applauding Miami for putting up such a good fight, the Heat were distraught. Bam said it felt like a gut punch, and Jimmy said he had failed to hold up his end of the bargain, which meant he had to win a championship next year. And so, the Heat marched forward, declaring 2021 as their year of revenge. In reality though, the offseason of 2020 ended up being a complete disaster for Miami, for reasons both in and out of their control. In the draft, they made a horrible mistake, drafting Precious Achiuwa with the 20th pick, just one slot before Tyrese Maxey. It was a horrifying oversight by Miami's scouting department. After the draft and during the offseason, Miami experienced the beginning of what I call the superstar strikeout. Time and time again, the Heat swung and missed on star players available for trade because either the talks fell through or Miami was just too hesitant to put all their chips on the table to complete the deal. James Harden and Giannis were the first 2 megastars the Heat missed out on here in 2020. Harden had requested a trade from the Rockets and had put Miami on his list of preferred destinations. The Heat reportedly had substantial interest in a potential deal for Harden, with at least 2 key people in the organization favoring a trade for him. Negotiations ultimately failed though, because 1, the Rockets wanted more draft capital for Miami, and 2, there was reportedly serious skepticism within the Heat organization about how well Harden would fit with the team's culture. Okay, well, if the Heat seriously denied Harden because of team culture, they're insane. Superstars who could average 35 with their eyes closed don't grow on trees. But apparently, Miami felt they could be picky with who they choose as a star. As you'll soon discover though, this mindset would backfire spectacularly. As for Giannis, the Heat geared up to sign him in the summer of 2021 when he was set to be a free agent. They were reportedly unwilling to do anything that jeopardizes their chances with him, which is why they basically did nothing in 2020's free agency class. This gamble didn't work out though, because once the Bucks traded for Drew Holiday, Giannis was pleased, so he re-signed on a 5-year extension. Yet another star had fallen out of Miami's grasp. Entering the 2020-21 season, the Heat were hungry to prove that they weren't bubble guppies. Yet what followed performance-wise was mediocre.
Jimmy, how would you describe the way the Miami Heat are playing basketball right now?
Terrible.
They went just 40-32 and earned the 6th seed. So what's with the sudden decline? Most people immediately point to the Heat's okay-ish roster as reasoning, but I think the main factor for this step back is that the Heat were subjected to the shortest offseason in American sports history, 71 days total of rest. Their season ended in October 2020, and they were back playing in December. Unsurprisingly, this affected their players dramatically, especially Jimmy, who missed 14 out of the first 18 games due to injury. The Heat started 6-12 as a result. Miami's offense, which ranked second best in three-point shooting the year before, dropped to 19th. They fell from 7th in offensive rating to 18th. They ranked 29th in pace and 25th in points scored. Essentially, their offense was equivalent to an LA Fitness pickup team. The Heat aimed to make a splash by trading for two-time All-Star Victor Oladipo, but that move ended up being more of a puddle than a wave. His season ended just 4 games into his Heat career due to a devastating knee injury. It felt as though all the magic pixie dust Miami had relied on during their 2019-20 season was now working against them, casting a shadow over their 2020-21 campaign. The Heat's only hope was that come playoff time, they'd sacrifice a baby under their stadium or something and summon the dark magic necessary to make a deep playoff run. Well, no babies were sacrificed. The Heat got swept. By the Bucks. Yeah, you heard that right. Milwaukee, who had gotten embarrassed by Miami back in the bubble, had come back and served a plate of payback pie. The third-seeded Bucks handed 4 straight L's to the spiraling Heat, mostly in blowout fashion. The Heat's three-point shooting, which was already suspect, dipped from 37% to 31% in the postseason. Their once rugged defense was sloppy and lazy. Their big three declined into a mid-three. The Heat had gone from the untouchable cool kids on the block to being laughed at and memed on for their failure. Now it was time to go back to the drawing board, and plot had a return to the top. The Heat's summer of 2021 stands out as perhaps their most successful one in the grand scheme of things. They brought in a boatload of helpful players, most notably Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker, each of which provided shooting and defense the team desperately needed. Then, they gave standard contracts to Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, and Caleb Martin, all of whom had been on two-way deals. Those names probably sound familiar to you, and it's because all three would unexpectedly emerge into valuable role players. Lastly, the Heat gave 5 years and 90 M's to Duncan Robinson, and extended Jimmy 3 years $146 million. The superstar was officially under contract until the 2025-26 season. A beautiful basketball marriage had been born between the Heat and Butler, with no divorce anywhere on the horizon. This barrage of great moves ended up propelling Miami to their most successful regular season in the Jimmy Butler era. They won 53 games and earned the first seed. The key to the Heat's success lied in their elite depth, something that the team wouldn't be able to replicate in the following years, because of how difficult it was to retain all these pieces financially. That's why the 2021-22 season was so crucial for the Heat. A lot of their key rotation players like Strus, Martin, and Vincent were on cheap deals. Miami needed to shoot for the stars now before they had to pay up. Since these 2022 playoffs were so crucial, the Spotify playlist of these Heat players must have been fire as hell. Only one problem. The headphones they were using to listen to their songs are probably overpriced. Don't worry, dear viewer, I gotcha. If you want some affordable headphones, then you gotta take a look at these everyday earbuds by Raycon, the sponsor of today's video. I've been using them myself for some time now, and they've been great. They have a 32-hour battery life, can charge up to 90 minutes of battery use in just 10 minutes, and have a crazy good noise isolating feature that scares my friends.
Yo, Dylan. Damn, you can't hear me? Let's see that noise isolating technology. That's tough. I gotta get me one of those.
I personally use my Raycons at the gym the most. They don't fall out of my ear. they have good sweat resistance, and the noise isolating is perfect so I can lock in like I'm Jimmy Butler. They're listed for $80 on Raycon's website, but if you go to buyraycon.com/DylanDoesBasketball, you'll get 20% off the best-selling everyday earbuds, brought to you by Raycon. Don't miss this opportunity. Now where were we? The 2022 playoffs were the perfect time for the Heat to strike and make an NBA Finals run. The East ran through Miami, Florida. In round 1, they quickly dispatched of the Hawks in 5 games, eliminating the team that had made it to the Eastern Conference Finals 1 year prior, in large part due to more playoff Jimmy madness. The Sixers were up next, but they were down a man after Embiid's face got smashed by Pascal Siakam's elbow, sidelining him for the first 2 games of this second round series. The Heat jumped out 2-0, then dropped the next 2 games after Embiid returned. Philly was backing Miami into a corner, but the Heat responded with a 1-2 punch, destroying the Sixers in Game 5 by 35, then closing them out in a road victory to end the series in 6. Miami's persistence was on full display here. While the Sixers bowed their heads at the first sign of trouble, the Heat always remained confident and fearless. They were back in the Eastern Conference Finals, facing the Celtics once more. Boston was an interesting team because their 51-win record was hardly a representation of their skill level. After opening the year 25-25, they went 26-6 to finish the season, regularly dominating opposing teams with their lethal shooting and defense. Miami may have had the better record, but the Celtics were favored to advance. Through the first 5 games, Boston ironed out a 3-2 series lead, and the Heat were starting to sputter. Lowry had been dealing with a hamstring strain throughout the entire playoffs that had turned him into a geriatric patient. Jimmy had knee inflammation that forced him to exit Game 3 early, and Tyler Hero had a strained left groin that ruined his play from Game 3 onwards. The Heat were a walking retirement home, and they needed some heroics, which Butler provided, scoring 47 in Game 6 on the road to force this series to 7. The impossible was on the brink of being achieved. Throughout Game 7 in Miami, the Heat looked like they were on their deathbed, barely being able to keep it competitive with the Celtics.
Sidestep 3, tough shot and splashdown.
Yet somehow, after being down by 11 with 2.5 minutes left, the Heat stormed back to get to within 2 with just 20 seconds left. Then, Marcus Smart missed a layup. Jimmy grabbed the board, jogged down the floor, and fired a 3 that had the potential to be one of the greatest shots in NBA history. In what would serve as a foreshadowing for the rest of his Heat career, though, he fell short.
For the lead. Butler had a clean look, Jeff, and he went for the kill shot.
The game was over. The Heat were heartbroken, and the Celtics were going to the finals. To anyone who was watching, it was obvious that the Heat needed to add more star power. Bam and Jimmy just wasn't enough. Miami's front office agreed, so they decided to go star hunting in the summer of 2022. Unfortunately, the superstar strikeout would once again rear its ugly head. First, the Heat tried going after Bradley Beal, who had been in trade rumors since the Obama administration. Here's the problem though, Beal never actually requested a trade until it was too late. In 2021, to Miami's delight, he was considering requesting one before the draft, but then decided against it because he loved winning 35 games a year or more. Then in 2022, rumors of Beal leaving again began to rise. The Heat were ready to pounce. Only one problem. The Wizards are run by idiots. Washington handed this man a 5-year, $250 million contract with no trade clause and a 15% trade kicker. A crime against humanity if I've ever seen one. This immediately pulled him from any trade discussion indefinitely. Once he returned to the market a year later in 2023, the Heat were turned off, and refused to give up Hero in any trade discussions. So that was that, and Beal went to Phoenix. Another name that came up in the summer of 22 was Kevin Durant. He had requested a trade from Brooklyn, and Miami was one of his preferred destinations. Yet nothing materialized, mainly because the Heat were reluctant to give up Bam Adebayo, who the Nets desired. The Heat were in a pickle, because if they acquired KD and got rid of Bam, a core of Jimmy Butler, Durant, and Hero wasn't a serious contender. Thus, the Durant trade talks fell apart. The third star that Miami was in trade talks for was Donovan Mitchell, who was on the move after the Utah Jazz had failed yet again in the playoffs. The reports are conflicting on this one. Some NBA sources say the Heat offered Hero, Duncan Robinson, and picks, while others say Miami didn't even bother offering anything serious at all. If the latter's the case, then everyone in Miami's front office should be fired. Either way, the young guard ended up in Cleveland for a boatload of picks and young players, a package that the Heat couldn't have come close to sniffing in their wildest dreams. 3 more strikeouts for South Beach's star chase. After all that, Miami's offseason was just them losing PJ Tucker to Philly. Everything else stayed the same, which lowered confidence in the team's ability to make another deep playoff run. This confidence became even lower after the Heat had an average 2022-23 regular season, in which they won 44 games and earned the 8th seed. Their defense was good, but their offense was horrendous. They ranked dead last in points per game, and 28th in three-point percentage. Miami was in trouble, amplified even more when they fell down to the 8th seed after failing to beat the Hawks in the play-in. Their matchup in round 1 would be the 58-win Milwaukee Bucks, who they were expected to be steamrolled by. But thanks to a combination of Giannis suffering an untimely back injury and Jimmy Butler transforming into a basketball god, the Heat somehow eliminated Milwaukee in just 5 games. Butler had a legendary series, averaging 38 points per game on 59-45 splits. Yes, 59% from the field and 45% from 3. What the f?
Sets up on 3. Good! Butler's got 49 points!
He scored 56 in Game 4 and 42 in Game 5, putting on 2 of the most unreal back-to-back showings I've ever witnessed in NBA history. His amazing play guided the 8th-seeded Heat to one of the most improbable playoff upsets in basketball history. In round 2, the Heat continued their strong momentum, eliminating the New York Knicks in 6, even with Jimmy suffering a brutal ankle injury in Game 1 that hindered his athleticism from that point forward. What separated Miami from New York was their ability to hit timely shots and lock up on defense when needed.
Spinning, Brunson, leaning, shoveling into traffic. He turned it over.
Out of all of the playoff series the Heat played in this run though, none of them came close to the insanity that was the Eastern Conference Finals.
The Eastern Conference Finals are ready to ride.
Good evening, everyone, from Boston, and welcome to the Eastern Conference Finals with the same 2 teams for the 2nd consecutive year.
Miami, thanks to the power of selling their soul, shot unreal percentages from downtown in this series. Yes, you're reading that correctly. 48% from 3, which means they probably sacrificed 48 babies underneath TD Garden. This great shooting helped them jump out to a 3-0 lead, but Boston struck back, winning 2 straight, then forcing a Game 7 thanks to a lucky Derek White game winner. The series had been flipped upside down, and the basketball world was now preparing to witness its first ever 3-0 comeback. The Heat remained focused though, in a moment where they very easily could have crumbled.
But look, this is the way this season's been. This is a one hell of a series. At this time right now, I don't know how we're going to get this done, but we're going to go up there and get it done.
With all the momentum against them, Miami entered Boston in Game 7 and somehow won, in blowout fashion. They held the Celtics to just 84 points. Jaylen Brown was locked up, while Jason Tatum was hampered due to an ankle injury he suffered early on. Caleb Martin was the star of the show in this game. He scored 26 points and grabbed 10 rebounds, destroying the Celtics with Kobe-esque mid-range shots. A dagger had been shot into Boston's chest. An 8 seed had slain the Eastern Conference. The fun wouldn't last for much longer though, because the Heat fell back down to earth and were dispatched in 5 by the much superior Denver Nuggets in the finals. This series served as yet another reminder that while role players were great, a second superstar level talent alongside Jimmy Butler was absolutely needed if the Heat wanted to win a championship. Time was beginning to run out. Jimmy Butler was about to turn 34. The Heat just couldn't expect him to turn into MJ every playoff run. That wasn't sustainable. More help was needed. As fate would have it though, a lifeline was thrown at them in the form of Damian Lillard, who had requested a trade and demanded to be sent to Miami. If there was any star over the years that the Heat had to acquire, this was the one. As we all know though, they failed to do so. So how did they screw it up this time? Overconfidence and mismanagement. aka, they pissed the Blazers off. It started when Lillard's agent, Aaron Goodwin, made it clear that Lillard only wanted to play in Miami and Miami only, even going as far as calling up other teams trying to put together packages for Dame and telling them to give it up, or else they'd be trading for an unhappy player. The Heat saw all this happening and became cocky and stingy. They figured that since Dame's value was so low, they could get away with offering a little less. A report came out in late September that the Heat weren't believed to be offering even close to their full array of tradable assets in talks with the Blazers. They were hesitant to part ways with rookie Jaime Jaquez, and didn't want to give up all their picks. Long story short, the Heat refused to cash in all their chips. This made the Blazers furious, who were trying to get the best package available and felt they were being sabotaged.
It finally happened. Damian Lillard has been traded. Not to the Heat, but to the Milwaukee Bucks.
Once the Milwaukee Bucks swooped in and offered a far more enticing deal, the Blazers said yes in a heartbeat, eager to end this drama-filled saga and screw over the arrogant Heat. They valued Drew Holiday, who they received, far more as a trade piece than they did Hero. The Heat, who realized they had just made a cataclysmic mistake, sheepishly offered what was touted as a significant offer for Holiday, even including more than they did for Lillard, according to some. Welp, upon hearing of this quote-unquote great offer, the Blazers laughed in the Heat's face, hung up the phone, and traded Drew to the Heat's arch-rival, the Boston Celtics. The Heat had burnt bridges, and dug themselves into their own grave in the process. From this moment onward, the Jimmy Butler era in Miami was unofficially over. In the 2023-24 season, there was no miracle postseason run to bail them out from their incompetence. After putting together another subpar year, Jimmy suffered a season-ending knee injury in the play-in, and the Heat lost in 5 to the Celtics in round 1. This is when the relationship between Jimmy and the Heat organization began taking a turn for the worse. After Miami was finished off by Boston, Butler, who had been sitting on the sideline due to injury, fired shots at both the Celtics and the Knicks on camera and on social media.
1, 2, 3, action. If I was playing, Boston would be at home. New York, damn sure would be at home.
The guy whose team was just bounced was talking mad smack, and Pat Riley, the longtime executive, was having none of it.
If you're not on the court playing against Boston or on the court playing against the New York Knicks, you should keep your mouth shut.
Most fans didn't think much of this interaction, because Jimmy and the Heat had previously gotten into fights that looked bad but were actually fine. This time though, things were different. Jimmy was reportedly caught off guard by Riley's harsh message here.
Then, Riley and Butler tried to have a last-ditch meeting with the end goal of repairing their relationship, but the executive's attempts at relating to Jimmy just came off as unhinged. The two's relationship never recovered. To add insult to injury, the Heat were refusing to extend Jimmy to the 2-year max deal he desired, which left the two sides at a crossroads, one that could only be solved via trade. So, after the Heat opened the 2024-25 regular season looking mediocre again, Jimmy publicly requested a trade in January.
I want to see me get my joy back from playing basketball, and wherever that may be, we'll find out here pretty soon.
Can you get your joy back here on the court?
Probably not.
Yeah, you're seeing this right. He announced it in a post-game interview. The Heat were outraged, suspending him for 7 games due to conduct detrimental to the team. This marked the official end to the Jimmy Butler era. He was traded to Golden State a few weeks later. Now, NBA analysts of all kinds are scratching their heads, wondering where it all went wrong for the supposed match made in heaven. Well, I'll tell you who's to blame. Blame both sides. For the organization, the reality was that Pat Riley and his staff got complacent. They never felt desperate to go all in with Jimmy and Bam, and that ultimately played a huge part in their downfall. Think about how many Photoshop pics you've seen of various stars in Heat jerseys, and then think about how many of those stars actually ended up wearing their jerseys. The answer is 0. None. They never cashed in their chips, because they became comfortable with their success. Anyone with more than 3 brain cells would have told you that after the 2022 playoffs, 3 seasons ago, the Heat should have moved mountains to get another elite player. Anyone would have helped. Okay, maybe not anyone. Instead of doing that though, the Heat smugly believed that their coaching and playoff Jimmy would bail them out. That did happen twice, in 2020 and 2023, but in the finals, they got washed both times because their team was completely overmatched. The Heat were too scared to risk it all, but in the end, they lost everything anyway. Jimmy Butler holds some responsibility for this as well. While he couldn't control who he played with, he could certainly control his conduct, which at many times was unpredictable and shameless. According to one report by Heat writer Ira Winderman, the Heat let Butler get away with problematic behavior for years. Miami had apparently signed Lowry, a godparent to Butler's daughter, for $85 million in 2021 because Jimmy demanded they do so. As we all know now, the Lowry signing ended up being quite a big disappointment. Butler appeared at shoot-arounds on his own timetable and decided he'd return from injuries whenever he felt like it. The Heat gave him unchecked freedom. He could get away with giving 50% effort for 82 games in the regular season, even if it ensured the Heat would never secure a high seed, because they just had to let Jimmy be Jimmy. Unfortunately, once he asked for an extension, Pat Riley finally drew a firm line, which all but ruined their relationship permanently. The Jimmy Butler Heat tenure is proof that in order to win a championship in the NBA, risks must be taken. The Heat never did that. It's almost as if after surpassing expectations in year 1, they became satisfied with where they were. They drank in the praise and never felt compelled or driven to improve. That's a dangerous mindset to have, and ultimately, it cost them big time. Luckily for teams like Miami though, since they're located in such a beautiful city, they'll have no problem finding another star to waste the prime of. Gotta love the NBA.